Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Four Lads Rangers Friday Night Live. Is it really night time? Is it still afternoon? I'm not too sure. But there was a couple of reasons why we've went for this time. Me and Mark were supposed to go a couple of hours ago, but real life got in the way and unfortunately held us on a wee bit. So there was supposed to be a pod tonight and there was supposed to be a pod earlier. So we've kind of just merged them, and this is going to be your Friday evening show. I'm delighted to be joined by Mark. Mark, you are a finance director. So you're going to help us discuss the accounts, and you come from a professional viewpoint as such, and you'll help us kind of understand the ins and outs of the intricacies of the accounts today.
Yeah, no pressure at all to deliver on this podcast, but no, happy to go into detail. I've had a little bit of time to dissect and understand what's in these numbers, and I'll give it a go to see what we pull out.
Yeah, certainly looking forward to it. So I think the main takeaways everybody would have seen, the kind of headline grabbing things from Rangers. We're going to go into it a wee bit more. If you haven't seen it, the financial highlights year ended the 30th of June. Revenue 94.1 million, operating expenses 92.2 million, EBITDA, which Mark's going to explain all this, 5.6 million. Profit before player trading, 2.7 million. Operational cash flow, 12.1 million. Loss for the year, 14.8 million. Closing cash balance, 30.5 million. Now, a couple of things obviously stand out for me, and I'm not a finance guy. I don't understand the ins and outs of all this. Closing balance, 30.5 seems quite good, considering it was 1.7 million last year. Loss for the year, 14.8, is down from last year, but still too high. Revenue being up 7%. All these things are positive, Mark. So these are the standout things, financial highlights, Rangers call them, for the year. What would you tell us about those figures and what it really means?
Yeah, I think in terms of what James Taylor elaborated to earlier, it's actually quite a positive year for the club. I know the actual loss itself, looking at, is obviously quite high, but in terms of where we are on a day-to-day, from an operational perspective, we're actually now trading at a profit. And I think you mentioned that it's the first time since the Europa League final we've done that, and through recent times, and we have not been operating at that level. So there's quite a lot of positives out of that. We can also go into details when we bring the slides up, but also revenue up, and there's a number of factors that have driven that. And I think a positive for me as well is just the day-to-day from a payroll and the staff costs have obviously came down as well, but again, we can go into that detail and what's been driving that. There's a couple of one-offs in that as well, which have been mitigated this year, which has also helped support. Over the piece for a day-to-day for me, and obviously the pre-player trading model, obviously being in the black and being positive is good to see. But then we've got the amortization piece, which obviously has a massive impact. And again, I'll go into a bit more detail on that when we bring up the slides. But over the piece, there's a lot of positives in there.
Yeah, I think simplistically for me that the highlights kind of stand out. So let's kind of go over it a wee bit. The revenue being at 94.1, up 7%, Mark, from last year is obviously huge. James Taylor, I think, highlighted the Europa League run, the Fenerbahce games, etc., being like the biggest one, being able to get through that. But why is the revenue went up 7%? It seems like it's such a high amount for 1 year.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Also, gate receipts, they're up 1.2 million year over year. Actual attendances average were actually down, but the pricing, and then obviously to your point in terms of the Europa League run, it's also helped that from a gate receipts perspective. UEFA prize money was about $500,000 better off this year over year. But then there's a piece on the other revenue, which I think primarily is driven from Edmondson House and like the Blue Sky Lounge. I think has definitely had a contributing factor to that as well. And that was actually our biggest growth. And just got a note here, it was actually 4.6 out of that 5.8 million, and was all driven from other revenue. So Edmondson House has definitely had a major impact in terms of that investment that we've put into the club, along with I think the likes of the Blue Sky Lounge as well, was also had a contributing factor to that.
Okay, so total operating expenses down 4% from 96.2 million to 92.2 million. One of John Bennett's biggest things was he wanted the 10 million loss to be gone that is now gone from the football club. It was pre-player trading, wasn't it? And he's managed, or the club themselves and the board have managed to do that within kind of 18 months to 2 years of he saying it. How significant is that, and how come the total operating expenses are down £4 million? That's obviously a good step.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things on this. Big one's obviously just the first team's wages. Last season in the accounts we would have had the likes of Todd Cantwell, John Lundstrom, Borna Barisic, Connor Goldson, etc. High earners in the club, whereas obviously last summer they would obviously replace them. We brought in like Sagamani, lower wages. So I think like for like we've actually reduced that quite significantly just in terms of what their average weekly wage was. So that impact itself, I think overall in terms of the cost coming down, the players' contribution to that was 83%, 3.4 million down year over year. And a big part of that's obviously just a number of the high earners that we had in the previous season, obviously not reflected in this year, which is giving us that saving.
Okay, so for the simplistic of us all, and I really do include myself in this, it says EBITDA. Now, this is going to be some sort of like pre-trading thing, 5.6 million. 2024, there was a 0.2 loss. Can you just explain to all us what that actually is and what it means?
Yeah, so that's your earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation, and amortization. So,
is that not what I just said? Yeah,
of course it was. Exactly, bang on point, Stevie.
Bang on.
So the big thing in a football club in terms of EBITDA prior to that is your amortization. So your contracts for all your players in terms of the lifelong value of the contract of the player's value then gets removed year on year. So if keep it as simplistic as possible, if you buy a player for 10 million and he's on a 5-year contract, every single year it would have a reduction of £2 million of that player's valuation coming down. So that would then be reflected in the books. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally does. Yeah, I get it. So it's just like buying a car, isn't it? Somewhat.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly that. So I think for me, the way the club would want to show that is what it showed prior to that, because it's technically not a cash impact, but it's a books impact. So they'd want to show two separate views to that of what the day-to-day operation costs are against what revenue are coming in, and then everything over and above that, like the reduction of the net book value of a player's valuation coming down year on year, would then reduce, as I said, like for the 5 years, for example, that £2 million would continue to come down year on year. So then you'd have an accumulation of all the players' values, and what does that cost to the business in terms of the reduction of their contracts, or another year into their contract, what is that then giving them their net book value?
Yeah, I get it. I think I get it. But we'll go with it. Profit before player trading, 2.7 million. So this is quite significant for me, because obviously it was minus 2 million in 2024. I think when we go back to 2023, that was over 10 million losses, because that's the whole thing that Bennett began to talk about. So important that us, for a football club, get to a point where we are trading before player sales and purchases and all that kind of stuff. We're trading positively, which we seem to have got to a point of doing. How significant then, Mark, I suppose, is that? And how big a result is that for us?
I think it's massive. I think when we've done that comparative to last year, the revenue just against the operating expenses was at a loss prior to adjustments. So to flip that to your point, I think it was we're at 2 million. So we're 2 million loss prior year. And that flip, just over £4 million year on year, is quite significant. And part of that's obviously driven from where we are from a revenue perspective, but it's more around to where John Bennett's message was. Obviously, James Taylor's mentioned before in terms of reducing that cost base. To do it as quickly as they have is quite a significant turnaround. And then, as I said, a big part of that's obviously just some of the players that we got rid of last summer and who we brought in are obviously on less wages.
Operational cash flow, 12.1 million. 2024, it was minus 7.7 million. That is a hell of a turnaround. I suppose this is where we start getting into the figures because of the takeover and money directly put into the club. Simplistically, I would probably guess that kind of significant, because that's a turnover of almost 21 million. And when you look at minus 7 to plus 12, then yeah, I'm guessing and this is a complete guess from an uneducated finance guy, it will be something to do with that.
That's obviously the biggest part of it, but what I noticed in the accounts as well was the debtors itself had actually reduced year on year as well. So obviously people due the club money have also paid part of that back as well. So that figures actually came down quite significantly year on year. So that obviously helped drive that cash balance up. But the significant impact is obviously the 20 million that's been put in by the investors prior to the year end.
Okay, so lost for the year 14.8 million. That's still a hell of a high when you think about it. But that's then money spent on players more or less. Because if your profit before player trading is 2.7 million, then can we put that kind of loss down to our player trading model?
Yes, not quite as technical as that, but there's other factors as well in terms of that year-on-year impact of, we've had a number of one-offs in this year's accounts, which I thought was quite telling, was the, it looks like we hadn't paid a severance package to Philip Clement, whereas we had done to Michael Beale in the prior year. That was just shy of 4 million. Whereas this year, it looks like we didn't actually do that. So that's obviously had a benefit when we do that year-on-year comparison to the loss. A couple of other things as well in terms of the interest we pay on the debt, that slightly came down year-on-year. And when we break that down in terms of money owed to clubs, so if we buy a player, for example, and we say, right, we're going to prolong the payments over maybe 4 payments, every 6 months we'll pay X amount to that transfer fee, there's interest over and above that as well. So that's actually came down. And in terms of money coming in, we've actually got some money on the back of that as well. So there's adjustments for that. And again, we can go into a bit more context when we break that down in the finance costs. But there's quite a few moving parts on that in terms of year-on-year comparisons.
And finally, before we kind of dive into it a wee bit more, the closing cash balance of 30.5 million compared to 1.7 million this time last year is massively significant. Now, that is down to the investment. I think that's quite clear. Money's been put in. But having a bank balance of 30.5 million seems really high to me. It seems like a good place to be. But then if you're making a 15 million pound loss in a season, that's going to be eaten into your closing cash balance, I suppose. So how significant is that? Because 1.7 million last year must have scared the absolute bejesus out of James Taylor if he's sitting with that amount, because that was far too low. But closing balance this year is probably not realistic because of the cash injection we've just had. So there needs I would say, I guess it's probably somewhere in between.
Pretty much. I think it goes back to that point in terms of the previous investors, like how solely reliant we were on them throughout prior seasons. But to your point in terms of James Taylor looking at that balance, it's quite significant year-on-year increase, but it's all primarily driven from what we've done in terms of that investment from the American owners. Like I'd mentioned prior to that as well, in terms of the debtors piece, has had a big impact on that in terms of that reduction. Also, money being paid back in terms of money we were owed. So that's obviously had a contributing factor to the overall cash in the bank at that point in time. But the growth like that's obviously given us that opportunity to invest in the summer. I know we've had some sales, and James Taylor brought that up in terms of sales of like Igamani, Dessers, Hefty, etc. That will all be reflected in the new financial year, given it's after the 30th of June. But it's also given us that opportunity to buy players at the start of the window. Also, when that came about in July, so that was also just having that money up front to obviously pay for the transfers prior to selling anyone.
So what is it? Where do we go from here when we're talking about the accounts and things like that? That's obviously the financial kind of highlights, Mark. But what do you want to discuss next? What's prominent? Is there any surprises in there? Is there anything that we need to be concerned about? What do we kind of, as supporters who would look at it and we just look at the kind of highlights, I suppose, it would seem like we're in a fairly decent place. But is there things that we need to look at? Is there things that we should be aware of?
No, I think for me the positive is we're on a journey, as James Taylor mentioned in his interview, in terms of that growth year on year. It's been quite significant. I think for me, though, looking at when you break it down, having the likes of Edmondson House, the Blue Sky Lounge, having other revenue streams other than match day is absolutely pivotal on where we want to be. European money had a contributing factor. That contributed 19% of the overall revenue for the year. So, Europe is still an important part for the club, given the impact that it's had on revenue, not only from the prize money, but also from the gate money and the hospitality piece. But that is one, Europe's also going to be important to us. The fact that we're in the black prior to the pre-trading model is significant. That is a big turnaround given where we have been in prior history. And as I said, part of that obviously driven from the increase in revenue, but alongside reduction of players' wages has had a significant impact as well in managing that properly, given some of the spending we have had in prior season has been significant.
So my question then would probably be to you, Mark, that if we're sitting with 30 million in the bank and it seems to be in a quite good position, they've already said that we are going to spend again in January, but they've also said that our summer results, we'd spent £20 million after everything. That was our financial outlay. So if we're spending £20 million, that's going to eat into your 30 million straight away. But we're also going to be, and I'll use James Taylor's phrases that has been used by Kevin Thelwell and things beforehand, very active in January. We're going to need another significant input of money. I don't think that's unreasonable to say. Otherwise, your 30.5 million closing cash balance will very quickly go if we've already eaten into it. Because that cash balance is at the end of, if I'm right, the year ended 30th of June. So come July, August, etc., we spent that 20 odd million. And that includes money we would have got in as well for Eagleman, Dessers, etc. So they don't balance each other up. So we're potentially 20 million eaten into that. That's a big question for me. And we're going to be very active in January. That means to me, and I'm surmising again from outside looking in, that we're going to need another investment of cash.
100%. Yeah. And I think, I don't know exactly what the owners are talking in the background, but just based on what they've been saying in terms of their language, I think that investment, and they're pretty keen to support the club. For me, I think exactly that. They'll be also putting in an additional investment. The positive on that, though, in terms of where we are from a financial fair play, in terms of first team wages to revenue, the benchmark 70%. We're currently sitting at 38, so we're well within that threshold in terms of protecting ourselves. Obviously, for the investors to then put in money to invest in the club, it's going to be depending on what their plans are and what they're looking to invest. I think for me, there is also going to be quite a bit of spending into the club given where we are currently, and also we're needing to add some players in there for January. But it will have to be from the investment from the American owners. They'd have to do that.
Yeah, it seems unreasonable to think. Of course, there's player sales. They might look to make a big player sale, but who realistically in our squad would go? You would have to look at somebody like Raskin. Would they try and make a big sale? Now, that's a positive for us in a way that if we did manage to make a big sale, your player trading model is beginning to work. But it's not positive for us in a way that you could end up losing one of your key players for that amount of money. And I look around the squad and you look around who we've really got that is value. And you can argue about Raskin's form this year. I don't mind if people want to say otherwise, but Raskins are probably our biggest selling point and our biggest player. But what price are you looking for him with 18 months left? Would we get the money that we really wanted for him? I'm not sure we would. So there's a load of questions surrounding that, Mark, I think, that goes into another one. Now, we had kind of put up some slides from the club and things today, so I'm going to bring the first one up. You wanted to discuss this a wee bit further, so I'm going to give you the platform here and let you talk about this.
Yeah, that's fine. So I've kind of given a bit of an oversight anyway of it, Stevie, but for me, obviously, that revenue, significant year-on-year growth of 5.8 million. In terms of operating expenses, as I alluded to earlier, that reduction in player wages has been quite significant, and to that point of the fact that we're only at 30% of first team wages to turnover is a very positive position to be in, and it also protects us from that financial fair play, given it's looming across a number of European clubs. There's a couple of things on here as well in terms of we're doing that comparison on the operating profit in brackets loss and before player registration. That 2 million loss prior year to the 2.6, 2.7 of this year. We've had no profit from the disposal of any tangible assets. So last year we could have sold like some equipment, any premises, stuff like that might have been within that 1 million. But I think the big one for me, which was in the prior year, and sort of the transformation we've had in the last 12 months in particular is that of our operating income, which is the 4.8 million. So we had an insurance claim, which was just shy of £3 million. And we roughly get about 800k or so from revenue grants year on year. But the fact that we're still at a 2 million loss and we received just under 4 million for insurance grants, claims, we haven't received that this year, just goes to show the journey the actual club's been on in terms of that increase in revenue alongside what we've decreased from a payroll perspective in particular. That's been a big cost that's obviously came down. So that flip off 4.8, bear in mind that 2 million loss we had in the prior year did include an insurance claim of 3 million, just under 4 million pounds. The swing on that is quite significant, and the fact that we're just shy of 2.7 million on a day-to-day operating profit is very positive for the club. Yeah, so just in here in terms of that breakdown. So if you actually go back to the previous slide now, Stevie, just for a second, there's just got another thing. A couple of things on here. I think a lot of people ask me when I also go into the detail with these numbers. The amortisation, I've obviously given a bit of context in terms of the players' contract, etc. So that's obviously came down, and also a number of players are getting into their final year of their contracts. We actually didn't make any money on player sales last year, so it was an actual loss of just under 600k, whereas the prior year we made 5.6 million profit on player sales, which is a big swing as well. And then the last one, that non-recurring costs, as I'd mentioned with regards to Michael Beale in terms of his severance package, that would have been included in that, but for Philip Clement, we have not incorporated that. So my view would be that we've been paying his wages while he's left the club. We've just kept his contract running as is, and that would factor into the above. But for me, it's a big swing in terms of we can't if we want to continue to be sustainable, the likes of sacking managers every 6-12 months is just not going to work.
Should maybe not appoint absolute diddies then, like Russell Martin, to take the phrase. But anyway, let's move on to this. Well, we're kind of rounding this up, folks. Don't worry, the account stuff. Because if you're like me, you would have been lost ages ago. But I'm trying my very hardest, Mark, to follow you. So carry on, buddy.
It's all right. Like I say, the big call out for me in terms of that revenue piece is that other revenue, as I mentioned, in terms of I think the importance of Edmondson House and the Blue Sky Lounge and also non-match day revenue coming into the club is absolutely vital given the impact it's had in 1 year. We've gone up by 4.6 million, which is quite significant on the year. The importance of the UEFA money, we're up slightly by $500,000, but we had a good run in terms of the quarterfinals. Obviously, ideally, given where we are now, we'd like to get out of the group or get to the playoffs, but that's obviously a challenge given our position. But it does have a significant impact on the actual club. And then finally, just that piece on the gate revenue. Actual average attendance was down by 900, but the increase of pricing on an average ticket was up by £40 for the season ticket. So that had obviously quite a significant impact as well in terms of that growth of 1.2 million. And then just breaking that down, as I mentioned, in terms of the other revenue, and within that, we've got that insurance grant that's obviously had a bit of an impact there in the prior year, which we didn't have this year. And I think that's important in terms of how much the club's turned around within the 12 months to not have that, and within this financial year still have that significant growth of just under £3 million year on year. I know it's still a loss, but the amortisation has a major impact on that. And then just to call it in the balance sheet itself, so in terms of the big thing I thought was quite interesting was just the reduction of debt. So we've got a top part here in terms of that current liability. So that basically means is anything debt-wise that we own within 12 months. And then there's a part just below it in terms of non-current liabilities, which is anything that's classed as a debt for over 12 months. Both of them year on year came down quite significantly. The short-term debt's down by 2.8 million and our long-term debt's down by 2.1. So across the piece, just shy of £5 million in the year. We've also had that reduction in debt, which is good to see.
Right, as we kind of round up then, I think, I don't want to lose the audience because a lot of them, Mark, like me, will just be like, well, 30 million in the bank, mate, let's go and spend it all on a decent centre half. But what would you sum up in your own kind of professional viewpoint, these accounts? Like, we can't not look at 14.8 million loss and say that these are good accounts. But at the same time, we're trying, I suppose the way I would look at that is we're trying to play catch up for so many poor decisions on the pitch and off the pitch, which have hindered the club. So we are losing money, and we have to get that player trading model right, which means we have to sign good players to ultimately sell them to make this machine oil properly, which we haven't done. But we can't ignore that 15 million loss, or almost 15 million. But at the same time, the closing cash balance of 30 million is pretty healthy. But as we've seen, that can be eaten into, or we've spoke about, that can be eaten into pretty quickly. So I'm a bit like, I suppose in a way, I just want somebody to tell me everything's all right and everything's fine. And the way that James Taylor paints it, and the way that the club's attitude towards us is that this is a really positive set of accounts. But losing 14.8 million doesn't seem to ring quite true to me. So in your professional viewpoint, where would it be? Where would we be looking at this from an accounts point of view? And what would you say to the average fan like myself who doesn't know a lot about finances and would look to you to say, where are we in terms of football club and financially and things like that?
Yeah, I think for me, first and foremost, it's a positive set of results in terms of that flip of day to day being in profit. And try to keep it as simplistic as possible. But that's the first positive. Revenue up, costs down. We're going in the right direction. To James Taylor's point, we are on a journey, and that's evident to see in terms of where we've been in prior seasons to where we are today. I think the player trading model is absolutely essential, given lack of TV money, etc. We've got, if you take it in terms of revenue, the gate receipts for our club accounts to 40% of the revenue. So it's a significant impact in terms of how we operate. But over the piece, I think it's a strong set of results. The player trading model is going to be absolutely vital moving forward to flip that from being a loss into profit. It'll be interesting to see, obviously, the activities going on this summer and how that's reflected into next year's set of accounts. But for me, the fact that we didn't really make any money on player trading last year, and our overall loss is down year on year, I think is a fairly positive sign. But to your point, we can't keep racking up losses year on year, and that's where it's vital that we also get the player trading model right, bringing players for pretty cheap, and then also selling on a significant profit. That will get us back to being overall making profit. But day to day, we are in a relatively good space given where we are, last season and prior years to that.
Do you think there's an ability to go and spend money in January in the summer at the levels we did? Is that sustainable? How are they going to fund that? Are you then looking at other things coming in? Are we looking at the potential of bigger commercial deals? Things have been said. Do you think we've seen Leeds go down routes where, Red Bull have come in and at places and stuff like that? Do you think that's an avenue Rangers will go down to try and maximise their spending ability?
I think so. I think first and foremost, given the American owners, I think they have to tap in that North American market. Sponsorship deals, TV rights, anything like that to also bolster the revenue. And for me, I think, all in all, given we are in the Scottish League, we are in a quite restricted market in comparison to our counterparts down across the border. I think if you put it in perspective, we're still not hitting the levels of what the bottom of the league and the Premier League receive from TV rights. So we're still a bit off, and that includes us having a decent run in Europe, pretty much full every single week. So for me, I think all in all, we have to tap into other markets and use our investors in terms of open opportunities to also try and boost that revenue, given we will need it to use for also the playing squad. But I think it'll come down to Andrew Kavanagh as well, and he seems pretty keen and eager to also invest in the club. Long term, we can't go down that route in terms of the financial fair play and all the other bits and pieces that comes with that. But short term, I think they will be dipping their hands back in their pocket for January. We also, you mentioned there, the likes of Raskin, he'll be coming to the last 18 months of his contract. Do we make a decision on does he stay, or do we cash in and make? I still think we get a reasonable amount from, given there's still 18 months on his deal. But the longer that goes on, then obviously his value will decrease. Then across the rest of the squad, I think they will have to tap in and sell in some players. But for me, I think all in all, the investors will dip in their pockets to strengthen in January, given where we currently are.
Mark, appreciate your expertise on the old financial stuff. We managed to get through all that without any red cards or booing. So well done to us. we'll move on. I think we'll talk about Rangers over the weekend. Obviously, some significant news today from Danny Rose' press conference, Mark, that the injuries have kind of bitten quite hard. We knew that John Souttar was injured. We knew that Derek Cornelius was injured. We didn't know the extent of that. He said today that John Souttar hopefully will be the end of December, but it's a muscle injury. It could be 25 days. It could be 40 days. You never know. Unfortunately, Mikey Moore, who'd finally hit form and we were starting to really enjoy him, is also out and looks like to be the end of December. And then it comes to the crunch moment. Derek Cornelius, he said, I have a little doubt that it's just 4 weeks, 5 weeks. It could be longer. And so that's already really difficult. You're more or less ruling Souttar and Cornelius out for the next 4 or 5 weeks to the end of December. A minimum. He says Derek Cornelius at the moment, he says he's a doubt it's just 4 or 5 weeks. So that sounds like it's not great. And Bailey Rice, unfortunately, Bailey Rice had to have surgery today and described as the manager as being a big one. So that is not great at all. Centre-back wise, this is going to be a real challenge. Other players looking a doubtful. Yusuf Chermiti seems to have got a knock in training, and Liam Kelly's also a doubt. I can only assume that Liam Kelly is still pissed from the Scotland game the other night and probably just can't make it. And well done to Liam. I really hope sincerely that he is. But in all seriousness, Mark, we knew they were injured. We knew it was going to be difficult. And you can talk about the ability of Souttar and Cornelius all we want, but the alternative now is out of cold storage comes out of cold storage. Easy for me to say. Comes Manny Fernandez, who we spent a lot of money on, so it's time, sink or swim time for him. But there's not a lot of experience there. Giga at times has looked really comfortable and really much like a rabbit in headlights. And then you've got James Tavernier who could come in. Sterling, gratefully, is back in training, but not quite ready. You know, this has put us in an unwanted hole. And you would have hoped maybe a week or two and they would have been all right and just small knocks. But these are significant injuries. We're going into a really solid run of games where you think we could possibly go and take something and maybe get ourselves back somewhere we need to be, and you get hit by a bit of a sledgehammer. These are really, really troublesome injuries.
Yeah, it's quite concerning, isn't it, given backline? I know we have our points on Cornelius and Souttar, but they're still better than what we've got coming in for the weekend. I think for me, I would probably bring in Tav there, just for a bit of experience. He's actually been all right when he's played at centre half, but as a makeshift back four, and a lot of guys, like I said, the likes of Fernandez, this is a matter of standing up now. We've spent quite a lot of money on him. For me, I think, put him in alongside, if we go to that back three like we have done, we'd have Tav, Fernandez and Giga, which obviously slightly concerning. You also put Aarons at right back, it's been a bit of a hit or miss, and then Magoma at left back. But even at that, it's a makeshift defence. I think given the two games we've got coming up, and domestically, Falkirk and Livingston, I think still should be all right. But it's obviously that game coming up on Thursday with Braga will be an interesting one given their front line, and they can cause us quite a bit of problem. But for I still think even with that defence, we should still have more than enough at home to be going to get 3 points. I don't care how we do it. 1-0, as long as we get the 3 points and start building on what we did do prior to the international break on 3 wins out of 3 domestically, been on a decent run. I think some of the wins have been quite impressive under Danny Rose so far in the league. But I think even with that makeshift defence, we've got more than enough, especially at home, to likes of Falkirk and Livingston. I think as the games go on and we know they're obviously coming up, then it's going to be a bit more of a problem. But for me, I would put in Tav just for a bit of experience and just a bit of organisation for the other two, given they can be a bit loose when the games are on.
Yeah, I don't think we'll go 3, given that we played a back 4 at Dundee and we looked a wee bit better. I would probably think that Connor Barron would most likely come in to maybe defensive midfield just to help Diamande. Is he going to be back? Hopefully, is Diamande and Raskin in that midfield. I wouldn't be surprised if they solidified the midfield a wee bit to try and help the back line. With regard to Tav, yeah, I mean, once again, we've tried to phase him out and he's still our key defender. We're in a really bad position, by the way, if Meg Homa gets injured. Mark, that is a scary thought that I can't think of anybody else who would be ready to come in at left back. Max Aarons is probably your only option to go and cover there. And that's a hell of a thing to put on a young lad as well. And we're going to, by the way, we're going to bounce from Saturday midweek, all the way now until more or less the Christmas time. So, and there's some tricky midweek ones in there when you think about Dundee United away, and then obviously your Euro games with Braga, Ferencváros, and then Hibs on that Monday night as well. So there is a lot to take in. Ideally, Sterling would come back in and cover quite a bit of that, or even start to start these games. You're asking a lot of a guy that's been out a long time. So, no, these were not good news for me, Mark, at all when it comes to the injuries. Bailey Rice is a sickener, because at some point you're going to want him to get game time. He's out of contract at the end of the year. Do they keep him and hope that, you know, he does kick onto form? I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure Bailey Rice would have stayed if he hadn't got the contract. I'm not sure Bailey Rice is where he really should be in terms of his progression and making his way into first team, but it sounds like that's a horror one. You know, Mans, you're describing it as a big one. It's just he never seems to have got a break, Bailey Rice, and I think in the games where he has came on, he's not quite been maybe where he should be. I really hope that Bailey Rice gets fit and kicks on again. Perhaps Rangers will keep him for another year, see what he's like. But that's a real sickener for us. I know he's not a first team player, but he is somebody that a lot of people talk about. When we're going to see Bailey Rice, when Bailey Rice is going to get his chance. And that's just, it sounds like, you know, when he talks about surgery and it's a big one, that sounds like it could be a season ender. And considering he's out of contract in the summer, Mark, it's big questions over Bailey Rice.
Yeah, I think the question is his time up? Obviously, it's awful given the situation with his injury. I think the only thing for me with Bailey Rice is we've had a number of managers out now in the building, and he's never really got a run in games. I think for me, is that a question of his ability? I don't think he's a bad player, but obviously every manager that we've had in over the last couple of years, nobody's ever given him a real run of games. So it's one for me. I think, you know, is it attitude? I'm not so sure, but obviously nobody's ever took the got him into the first team game or running games. He's never had that. I said when he's come on bits and pieces, he's done all right, but obviously what he's doing day to day clearly isn't enough for him to get in that starting 11. But to your point in terms of injuries, absolutely horrific. Alongside him being out of contract, it'll be interesting to see, do we give him another year and see how he gets on? There'll be one to also find out in the coming months. But to your point on Sterling as well, I'm quite glad Sterling's back. He's also been on the socials this week. It's good to see. I think he's probably not too far away given the coverage he's had. But I think to your point on that, you know, the amount of time he's actually been out, you know, the last thing we'd want to do is just chuck him into a game, given his history, his injury history as well. I think that'd be the last thing, just sort of drip feed him in with 20 minutes here and there, and hopefully, you know, once we get these couple of games out of the way and he gets himself back up to match fitness, then we could chuck him in, and also in that important run with the likes of away to Hibs, etc., you know, we'll need him.
Yeah, home to Hibs, thankfully, Mark. We've just been to Easter Road, which I thoroughly enjoyed with Danilo's dad. Thoroughly enjoyed, perhaps is a stretch. An excitable guy, that's for sure. He also spoke in the press conference today, and this was interesting because it's something I've actually suggested. I could see this happening a million miles away. When he's talking about the local coach kind of idea, he said, yeah, I think at first, at the moment, the setup is, I'm very happy with my setup. When I arrived, I spoke about having a former player maybe in my coaching staff, but I must really say Stevie stepped up really well into this role from the academy. The good thing is with him, he knows the academy well. He knows the players. He gives us a good link to the academy, and how he acts in the group at the moment is fantastic. And it's also the reason why I'm very convinced that we should go with this setup. It means not for the door is closed for someone else. This is still part of our job. We are looking for the market and we look what really makes sense. But I think I said that this in a couple of weeks ago as well. It's about content. And my coach, at the moment, we have great profiles in my coaching group. And at the moment, I enjoy the work with my staff. Now, he's not said, but I mean, he says here, it's also the reason I'm very convinced we should go with this setup. I predicted Rangers wouldn't appoint a coach. I predicted that Stevie Smith would be the one that kind of stepped up, and I predicted maybe wrong word. I think I said I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up that Stevie Smith keeps the position. I know Stevie quite well. I think he's a really good guy. He's a really strong coach. Knows Rangers very well. I'm not surprised he's grabbed the opportunity at all. He's a really good guy. And it looks like, judging by that, they've said the door isn't closed, but it looks like pretty much Stevie Smith will continue to work with the first team and continue to be that local ex-Rangers coach that he talked about.
Yeah, I think it's one, we've gone down this route before, haven't we? Like Alex Ray, etc., and it's not quite worked. The fact that Stephen Smith's been in the building for quite a long time, he's also played for the club. I think he gets what it's all about. He's worked with players in the past. I know it was a short time in terms of that interim spell he had, but I think he's well renowned. He's a relatively good coach. He's still, he said he's been in the game in terms of coaching for quite a long time now. I think it's one for me. I would stick with what we've got. We can go external or bring this coach that's obviously had affiliation with Rangers. It might not work. He's also had a little bit of time to work with him. He's happy with obviously what he's seeing, obviously giving him that chance. I don't mind it. I think it's a decent appointment. I quite liked him when he was obviously in charge, and thought he came across quite well. We've said that in the past where managers might come across well and don't deliver, but I like him. I think he's quite positive for the club. Like I said, the fact he's been in the building for quite some time now, I think it could be a good thing for the club.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Obviously, who else was in or who else was available, who else he even spoke to. Sounds to me like he's made a good impression with Danny Rule and he's prepared to keep him. Looking ahead for tomorrow, Mark, he also said that Danilo's going to start. It's not a secret, which leads me then to think about how we're going to set up. If Danilo starts, is it going to just be one up front? Miovski then coming on at some point, because Danilo won't play 90, we know that. Chermites, we think, is most likely out. He says he's struggling with a knock. He's not going to give you team news, so we'll just need to probably wait and see. I don't think he plays. I'm looking at probably Gassama and Ant-Man with no Mikey Moore as being my wingers, with Danilo up front, and then a midfield of possibly Diamande, Barron, Raskin, and then I'm going 4 at the back, which is Tav at right back, McComb at left, and most likely Gigan Fernandez in front of Butland. It's not an exciting lineup. It's not an excitement that grabs the attention. It's not a lineup that, it can be 4-3-3, it can be 4-5-1. It doesn't grab me with a lot of excitement, Mark. I'm not trying to be negative. You're looking for Gassama as being your game point. You're looking for us to try and get chances for Danilo. You're looking for Ant-Man to step up. And then with Diamande and Raskin having Barron there, can Raskin get forward and affect the final third? Because when he does that, he's actually quite positive. But it's not a team that you look at and think goals are easily to come by. I think that's the biggest concern for me. It's not a defence that you're completely sure is going to keep a clean sheet. Now, Livy are dogged. They know how to play. They know how to play Rangers. They won't be fazed by Ibrox. This is not an easy game. And we look at it and we say Livy, Falkirk, etc. at home should be games we win. And I agree with that. But nothing's a given at the moment. We do come on the back of a quite good run on domestic form at the moment of 3 wins. But Rangers need to kick on. Now's the time to do it. But it's not an 11 that overly excites me massively. There's not a lot of goals in there. And I'm a bit concerned about where that's going to come from.
Yeah, I think it's pretty telling on the actual activity we've had in the summer, given a number of the players you've mentioned we've signed in the summer, and they've not really been delivering. Goals wise, I think you're right. Gassama would probably be your outlet other than Danilo. I think Danilo works quite well when he's playing with someone, but the issue we've got, and it's been mentioned plenty of times on the pod in terms of Miovski, for me, given the way Rangers play and the teams we come up against, it doesn't really work. The only thing we could do is the likes of Ant-Man and Gassama getting the balls in the box and Miovski being roughly around about the 6-yard box and hopefully getting in from there. But then it's your midfield 3. Who's going to get us up the pitch? Barron, also going to be defensive minded. Then you've got Raskin and Diamande. The only thing for Diamande is it's outside the box. He's got a decent hit where he could also cause some problems with that. But it's then the other 3 in terms of Ant-Man also getting assists. But I think if we're going to just keep with Daniil up front, I think he's better playing with someone than being the lone striker. The issue we've got, though, fitness-wise, is, come 60 minutes, he's normally done. But that gives us the opportunity to bring Miovski on. But I just think the way we play, it doesn't play to his strengths with Miovski. Given when he was at Aberdeen, he's more benefit, obviously, balls in behind him. We just don't do that. And given the teams that we're up against, in particular with Ibrox.
You seen his goal, didn't you, for North Macedonia and against Wales? That is bang on. And by the way, he used to score them for Aberdeen against us.
Yeah. All the time. And that's it. And I think the way we play and obviously what we're up against, in particular with Ibrox, it just won't, we just don't play to his strengths. But if we're going to do anything for Miovski, I think we need to utilise the width, getting to the byline and putting balls in the box and take it from there. Because I think to Miovski's strengths, we just don't play to it. But Daniil, I think, is better if he is playing with someone than being that lone striker or having the likes of Mike Moore, number 10, round about him. But I think to your point, we're not going to play with that, given obviously what we've got in terms of injuries to the backline, some protection there, and then also need some width to get up the park.
Yeah, interesting. Rangers Review, Joshua done a deep dive into Bojan Miovski, and it's quite obvious what the issue is. He's only had 9 shots in this team since he's came to Rangers in the league. He was averaging 2.5 shots and 9 touches in the box per 90 with Aberdeen in his last season. He's nowhere near that for Rangers. Rangers haven't created at all. That's my biggest concern, Mark, against stubborn defences that we're going to come up against, well organised, will be able to hit set pieces and things like that, that this team need to find a way. And by the way, I thought we were quite good against Dundee. I thought we were quite professional. I thought it was a good performance. The injuries have slightly knocked my confidence going into the weekend. That it's not that I don't think we'll win. That's not that. I just don't think it's as, and this is, I'll use this term really loosely. I don't think it's as solid as going into the weekend as we have before. So these are big games, Matt. No excuses. Everything's got to be pushed aside. We're about to go into a run of games where there's 7 league games that we look at on paper. And this may be unrealistic, but we think we should be getting points out of these games. When you think about Livy, Falkirk at home, then Dundee United and Kelly away, then it's Hibs at home, Hearts away and Motherwell at home. I think that run goes. These are games where Rangers would fancy points. Now, I'm not saying they're easy. United, Kelly, Hearts away are all really difficult. But if we're serious and players are going to step up, now's the time to do it. These injuries coming at this time is not great. We need to get the form of Dundee and look into these games the coming weekends just to keep building that momentum.
Yeah, I think the Dundee game, in all fairness, I think the tempo we played at, we were quite fluid, moved the ball pretty quickly. Mike Moore, I thought was outstanding. I thought the way we broke up the park and just that one touch, breaking the lines pretty quickly. We're just talking about the team, our starting 11 for tomorrow. Who do we see actually doing that? I don't have full confidence that there's a lot of boys in that team that would be able to do it. But the positive is, we've been on a run and hopefully we're still keeping that momentum from where we were. But to your point on Livingston, it's going to be a hard game, from set pieces. I know we've brought in a set piece coach, so be interested to see how we do on that. But defensively, given our height, that is my worry. Corners and long throws, how we defend them, given Giga and Fernandez, will be pretty interested to see how they deal with the balls coming to the box. But I think for me, we've got to take the positive of how we ended the international break going into it now. As I said, 2 home games in terms of Falkirk and Livingston. They're not easy, but I'd be confident we still should be, given the team that we've got, getting 6 out of 6. But I think for me, it's one game at a time. Given I think if we get carried away with 3, 4, 5 games down the line, it could be gone before we even know it.
Yeah, that's completely fair, because every time we do that, Rangers do tend to let us down. A lot of comments about Finlay Curtis and Lyle Cameron. That for that point, I would absolutely love to see them get game time. Would I start Finlay Curtis tomorrow ahead of Oliver Antman? Yes, absolutely no issue with that. Absolutely at all. Playing him on the right hand side might be ideal. Perhaps we're going to start to see Finlay Curtis get a run, but we also need at some point to start seeing something from Oliver Antman. So there is that. There is that caveat to that, I think is probably a decent word. Mark, thank you very much, mate. Thoroughly appreciate you joining us just to talk about the accounts and kind of have a chat on them. Very kind of informative, a lot of information in there that I nodded along and pretended that I understood. But I really appreciate, mate, you coming on and having a chat. And let's hope Rangers do continue to build the momentum and get some positive results starting with tomorrow.
No, you're welcome, mate. I think it was one that obviously just coming out today, also the headlines on it. I try and keep it as simplistic as possible for the viewers. I was not going to bore you with the technicalities like EBITDA, etc. So try and keep it as simplistic as possible, and hopefully the viewers got something from it.
Well, I hope so. We do have, again, thousands of people watching at a weird time as well. It's dinner time. I appreciate everyone's got families and Friday night and all that sort of stuff. So we really appreciate it. This, as we said, it's top of the show, folks. We'll replace your live pod for later on. There's no point in doing two. So we hope you enjoyed it. Huge thanks to everybody that has commented, everyone that joins in, everyone that's joined as memberships and on the YouTube as well. If you want to do that, then you can just by simply scanning the QR code there and you become a member. If you are a member already, please get on the Black Rooster competition for tomorrow. And you can pick yourself first goal scorer and predict Rangers result tomorrow. Winner wins dinner at Black Rooster, which is well worth it. So, and it's free to play. So come and have a go at that if you're already a member. It's in the shorts part of the membership. So just go in and have a wee look and you'll find them all on YouTube. Huge thanks to our sponsors, Rhino Express, Clydeview Fire Protection and Joinery. Big thanks to Ian Martin, really good friend of mine, for everything that he does for the pod over at Athlone Industrial Solutions. And also congratulations to Carlo. He'll know why that is. All the gang at CSD Air Conditioning. Thank you very much. Our new sponsors, Amrit at Candid. We really appreciate that. And our Sunday sponsors, Local Dart Shop Online. Thank you, guys. Really, really appreciate it. It's my dream to have a page full of just sponsors and just my wee bald head tipping over them, saying hello to everybody on pod day. That would be fun one day. Thanks to our partners, Black Rooster and Art of Gold as well. But most of all, folks, thank you to you guys. Have a great weekend. Have a brilliant Friday evening. I hope you thoroughly enjoy it and have a good time, whatever you're doing. We'll be back tomorrow with a match day vlog, and we're also doing a match day reaction tomorrow. I'm not sure who's on, Andrew and somebody. I'm not sure if I'll pop on from Ibrox and join them. I really don't know. But for all you going to the match tomorrow, hope you enjoy it. Get some clothes on because it is freezing out there. I think it'll be the old hat for this old baldy heat, that's for sure. But it's me and Andy tomorrow at the ground. We'll look forward to the match day vlog. So huge thank you. Have a great Friday night, folks. Have a good weekend. We'll catch you again tomorrow. Take care. Bye.
The Four Lads podcast is sponsored by Rhino Express, Clydeview Joinery, Athlone Industrial Solutions Limited, and CSD Air Conditioning, in partnership with Black Rooster and Art of Gold. Thank you for listening to or watching the podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show.